Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really jumping into something deep, a relationship that's both incredibly close and, well, profoundly divided. We're looking at Judaism and Christianity, specifically focusing on Jesus and this whole concept of the Messiah. It's the story of shared roots, but then this huge divergence in belief that's really shaped history for centuries. And when you look at them, I mean, the common ground is undeniable, right? The Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament for Christians, and these core ideas, one God, the covenant, and something that often gets maybe understated. Jesus himself was Jewish, born, lived, died, all as a Jew. So the big question for us today for this deep dive is, how did these two faiths, starting from such similar places, end up on such different paths? What nuggets can we find in the sources to really understand this almost like familial split? To really get this major divergence, we've got to unpack those core theological differences. Where should we start with, say, the Jewish perspective on Jesus as Messiah?
Right. Well, what's really striking is how consistent and unanimous Jewish tradition is on this. Jesus is rejected as the Messiah, not just the Messiah, but also as a prophet, or certainly as any kind of divine being. And this isn't some minor disagreement, It's tied directly to fundamental Jewish beliefs.
Yeah.
The absolute bedrock reason is that Jesus, quite simply, didn't fulfill the specific, very tangible requirements for the Messiah laid out in the Hebrew Bible, the Tanakh. You see, from that perspective, the Messiah has to fulfill all the prophecies in one go. We're talking actual verifiable events like rebuilding the temple in Jerusalem, bringing global peace and justice, gathering all Jews back to Israel from exile, restoring the Davidic kingdom. None of that happened during Jesus' time. And there's no real concept in Jewish thought of a second coming to, finish the job later.
Okay, so it's less about interpretation and more like a checklist of major world events that just didn't occur. What other theological reasons support that view?
Well, another big one is the idea that the Torah, the law, is immutable. It doesn't change. Jewish tradition holds that no prophet, it doesn't matter how inspired, can contradict or cancel the laws God already gave. And some of Jesus's actions and teachings, like his approach to the Sabbath healing, for instance, were seen by some authorities back then as challenging that established law. Plus, there's the traditional view that prophecy itself actually ceased centuries before Jesus, with Malachi, the last biblical prophet.
Interesting. So the timing is off for prophecy, too.
Exactly. And then there's perhaps the most fundamental point, God's absolute unity and non-corporeality. Strict monotheism is the core of Judaism. God is one, indivisible, without a physical body, beyond human form. Maimonides, the great medieval scholar, listed this in his Principles of Faith. God has no body. Physical attributes don't apply. So worshiping a person, even a holy person, that's fundamentally impossible in Jewish thought. It crosses into idolatry, which makes the Christian idea of God incarnate, God in human flesh. Well, that's a profound, completely irreconcilable difference.
That theological gulf is huge, definitely laying the groundwork. But it wasn't just about beliefs, right? There were actual historical events that kind of cemented the split.
Oh, absolutely. History played a massive role. Think about the Council of Jerusalem, maybe around 50 AD. That was really crucial. They decided Gentile converts didn't need to follow most of Mosaic law, the Jewish legal code. That decision started carving out a separate Christian identity, less tied to daily Jewish practice. It opened the doors wide for non-Jewish converts.
Right, making it less of a Jewish sect and more something else.
Precisely. And then later you have the Bar Kokhba revolt, that big Jewish uprising against Rome in the 130s AD. The leader, Bar Kokhba, was even hailed by some as the Messiah. This forced a really clear choice. Jewish followers of Jesus couldn't back another messianic figure. It solidified the separation between the early Christians and the main body of Judaism. That period was a real defining moment.
So it's like these theological differences met these historical pressures, and the paths just diverged sharply.
Exactly. And connecting this all together,
Right.
Understanding this relationship, this connection and split.
Yeah.
It isn't about trying to erase those deep differences. It's not about finding some common ground on who Jesus was theologically. It's more about acknowledging the complex history, the social forces, and the core theological reasons why these two traditions took such distinct paths, respecting each tradition's integrity, really.
So we've kind of circled back to that core paradox. You have this shared ancestry, this common scripture, but then these fundamental, irreconcilable differences over Jesus, over God's nature, over divine law. It's powerful how two major world religions are defined, at least partly, by this foundational disagreement about one person, which really leaves you thinking, what does that mean for how these faiths relate to each other, even now today? Something to chew on after our deep dive.